America goes woke and abandons all common sense. Tucker Carlson highlights how one country's fighting back against far-left policies. It's featured in a brand new episode of his Fox Nation Originals series that drops tomorrow. Hungary versus George Soros, the fight for civilization. Here's a preview.
In the United States, he has installed radical prosecutors who refuse to enforce the law. In Europe, he's tried to topple democratically elected governments in Georgia, Romania, and Ukraine. He spent vast sums of money encouraging Europe and the United States to accept millions of foreign migrants. Despite Soros' best efforts, one unlikely country is fighting back. That country is Hungary, the very place George Soros was born.
Tucker joins us now. All right, Tucker, so what was the game plan for the Hungarian leader to fight back against Soros?
Well, nothing complicated. That was the real lesson. They didn't really do anything that, you and I couldn't come up with over a cup of coffee in about 20 minutes. They just built a fence and put a couple guys there with a dog, and that was it. And they were serious about it. This is our country, 10 million people, landlocked, been invaded a lot over the last 1,000 years, and we want to control who comes in. We're not against immigrants. We just want to know who they are, and if you come here without permission, here's their whole immigration strategy. I watched it firsthand. They take the guys, they take their picture, they interview them, and then like 15 minutes later, they lead them outside the fence and let them back into Slovakia. And that's the whole thing. And it works. And that's kind of what they do in everything in Hungary. It's not a radical country. It's not a theocracy. It's a very sort of simple, sweet country with some problems like every country, but they just kind of try to make it better. That's all they do. And the beauty of going there is you realize it's not hard. You just have to sort of want to make your country better. A little bit. Again, nothing radical. And you can have a much better country.
Oh, all right. We'll take it around the table. That sounds like a nice idea. Judge Janine.
Hey, Tucker, what are they doing about Soros? Have they tried to remove him or prosecute him or do any of the things that he would do to us if he could?
So their idea, no, of course not. Nothing like that whatsoever. Soros was born in Hungary, raised there. He's lived in London in the U.S. and doubtless other countries, too, in the ensuing 65 years. But he spends a lot of money on what are known as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, basically massive lobby groups, international, accountable to no one, that try to change the internal politics of Hungary. And the Hungarian government has basically just said out loud, we don't like this. This is subverting democracy. These are non-citizens or not Hungarians trying to influence our internal political program. Again, that's what we would call in this country an attack on democracy. The Biden administration supports it. They attack the Hungarian government because they don't want foreigners trying to decide who gets elected there. The whole thing is like, you realize democracy is the opposite of what they say it is. Their view of democracy is one billionaire gets to run your country. That's not my view of democracy. I don't think it's most people's.
Geraldo Rivera.
Erica, hi, Tucker. Erica and I visited Budapest the summer of 2020. They were looking forward to the elections coming up in April. Viktor Orban, the president, very controversial there. He's thought of as authoritarian. Also on the ballot is the fact that in Hungary, they're not allowed to teach LGBTQ facts of life until a kid is 18 or over. Do you want America to be more like Hungary? Is that why you did this?
Well, I don't know if I'd say it's authoritarian. I mean, they didn't lock up hundreds of people without trial in solitary confinement for staging a political protest or trespassing. We did do that and are still doing it. Nothing like that, as far as I know, is happening in Hungary. There are no political prisoners. Orban could lose, by the way, in the elections in April. So it's hardly this monolithic one-party state. It's not like one party controls all the levers of government, like is the case in this country. I mean, look, I'm an American. I love America. I will always defend America. But the idea that Hungary is less a democracy than the U.S. or than Ukraine, I mean, it's just a lie. Anyone who says that is either lying or doesn't know anything.
GG.
So I'm going to ask a super naive question because that's what I do. I'm, like everybody here, infuriated by the funding of these progressive DAs by the Soros, I guess it's Open Society or whatever it's called. So I go and I look him up and I go, okay, he actually sounds like in the 80s. I remember in the 80s how beloved he was because he helped with the fall of the USSR, if my memory is correct, and I remember reading about it in National Review and the American Spectator, and I'm reading about his past, and I go, his dad was in Siberia, in a Siberian prison. He escaped from Nazi Germany. He helped with the fall of USSR. Is he aware that his money is being used to destroy America? Is this just something where he's not paying attention to it because he's in his 90s? I told you it was a naive question.
Well, I wouldn't just say America. I would say the West. Western civilization is his target. And I know a lot of people who know Soros personally, and some people have done business with him. Every single person knows him, says this is one of the smartest, most interesting people in the world. And I believe that, and I'm impressed by it. But his program for the past 15 years at least has been to make the societies he focuses on more dangerous, dirtier, less democratic, more disorganized, more at war with themselves, less cohesive. In other words, it's a program of destruction aimed at the West. Now, I don't know what his motive is. I'm certainly not going to guess. People are complicated. He clearly is. But that's what that program is. So let's not pretend it's a political program. It's not. Increasing the number of murders in a country, what is that? It's an attack on the country. And that's what he's doing.
Dana?
Is that well, I'm curious, does he have that kind of effect, or does he put that kind of money into Hungary as well?
Well, he certainly tried. Yeah, he's put a lot of money into Hungary through these non-governmental organizations. And let's just be clear. If George Soros walked around Budapest, which he does, I think, every year, he would be better treated than I am in Midtown Manhattan. So this is a country that tolerates dissent in a way that the United States doesn't. I mean, I talked to people who were opposed to the Orban government. You know, they were eating outside in restaurants. Again, there are people sitting on your set right now who can't do that in New York because someone would spit on them. So, like, the caricature, it's not my job to defend Hungary, only to learn from it as an American and try and hold up the lessons for us to emulate. But the idea that this is a police state or some theocracy or even like a right-wing country, that's like ridiculous. Ask anybody who spends time, a lot of the movie business is now working out of Budapest because of tax breaks. Ask any of those guys,
Also, they breed really great dogs.
Ah, there you go.
Vizsla, the national dog.
Yeah.
Heard of him?
I have.
Our very own Percy.
A very own Percy.
All right, Tucker, thank you so much.
Thank our very own Tucker.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.